Hey everyone, it's Allie Gonino from the Balanced Bae Podcast, and today we have a very special guest. Her name is Alexa Smith. She's an environmentalist. She's just written a new book. She's a new author, and I'm so excited to have her on today to talk about zero waste living, environmental justice, integrational environmentalism, which I'm excited to hear about because I haven't heard that term thrown around yet. Before we get into all the juicy, good details of all the things that we are passionate about, can you just tell everybody where you're from, where you grew up, like what your childhood was like, and what made you want to get into this line of work?
Yeah, definitely. So I am currently a senior at the University of Illinois, and I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. I feel like a lot of environmentalists have this sort of like magical childhood like upbringing where their parents took them on all these exotic hikes and all of that, but I really didn't have that. I had a forest in my backyard, so that was kind of my idea of nature. But I really got passionate about environmentalism in high school, and I took like an environmental science class, and it was sort of like this formative time of my life where I was looking at what I want to do for my career in the future. And it just seemed like a really purposeful like area to work in. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it like as a career, but I have really always been passionate about nature and have had some like traveling experiences growing up. I was able to go to Indonesia with one of my best friends, whose family does a lot of traveling, and interacting with some of like the indigenous cultures there and seeing how they live their day-to-day lives in such close proximity with nature. It was really inspiring to me, kind of thought-provoking. So I guess like that definitely affected my values, and hopefully we'll get into some of those discussions about like intersectional environmentalism today.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you say that about having like a forest in your backyard, because I also had tall trees in my backyard growing up, and I would always pretend that I was just like a wildling living out, in nature, and the house wasn't really there. It was just, it was just me in the forest and all my little woodland friends, like the squirrels and stuff. And I think that's probably where my passion for defending nature comes from too. When I just recently moved to Nashville, and the house that I moved into had this really cool forest in the back, and it was my favorite part about the house. And you could tell that the trees have been growing for decades, and there's just like cool wildlife that I didn't even know was able to grow in Tennessee. And I came back from working in Atlanta over the summer, and they totally bulldozed my forest, which is devastating. I came home and I was livid. I was like, I'm gonna raise hell. I had a whole fit about it. There's nothing I can do. They're like building homes back there, but it was really like an emotional thing for me. Like I had grown accustomed to like going out in the morning and meditating and doing my yoga and doing my writing and like having my tree back there. And I know it sounds like really like hippie tree huggery, but like unless you kind of make the effort to make friends with nature, you don't realize how alive and how like they really do have spirits and presence. Yeah, so I'm very sad about it. I can't do anything except for like maybe write a sign on the back of our fence saying we miss our trees. But anyway, but yeah, just to say I'm on the same page. Okay, so you've just written a book. It's called An Economic Eclipse: Shifting Towards a Sustainable Future by Eliminating Waste. And I'm sure, as you're studying in school, that you're studying so much. And so is this book kind of your way of boiling down like the main things that you think are most important? Or like what was the inspiration for you to write a book? Why was it important? And how did you come up with like the talking points?
Yeah, So it's kind of interesting. So, I started writing my book just a couple months into the pandemic. So last June is when I started, June of 2020. And so I was actually on a study abroad during that semester in Greece. And I was studying at like a sustainable agriculture school. But yeah, so it was super cool. It was definitely like a change of pace because all of the classes were like very hands-on. I mean, yeah, the lecture styles were like very different and like sporadic, but like they really wanted you to like get your hands in the ground and like all of that, which is super cool. But we also were able to listen to some like presentations from master's students, and a lot of them like came from farming families, but they had a lot of insight on sustainable business. And the business side of things wasn't really something that I talked at all about in my studies. I'm kind of in the human dimensions of the environment is what my major is called. So I've done a lot with like environmental economics and then like the hard sciences, but sustainable business is like a totally new like realm for me. And so then
is it also a new realm for like us in general as like a society?
Yeah, relatively. I would say so like this concept of the triple bottom line, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's basically
let's hear it.
yeah. So basically it's the idea that businesses should be ultimately concerned about people, planet, and profit. So rather than just looking at like their bottom line, how much like money they're making essentially, they should be concerned about like other things that make their business sustainable, like their customers and the resources that they rely on. So that discussion started towards like the 1980s or 90s. But I think that like recently it's become like everyone's talking about it. I wish I remembered this statistic, but it came out of a study from, I'm not entirely sure where, but basically during the pandemic, consumers have been a lot more conscious about their environmental impact and choosing to support brands that are more environmentally conscious. So I think it's definitely become a hotter topic recently.
Yeah, I think having that like pause and that moment in time for us where we were all required to slow way down.
Mm-hmm.
When we're required to slow down, we're so much more mindful about everything that we do because, you know, I feel like before the pandemic, you just do and buy whatever's quickest, easiest, cheapest, because, you know, you've got places to go, you've got responsibilities, you've got kids to raise, whatever your story is. And so you're kind of just like making choices out of like, you know, maybe what's best for your budget. The bottom line. But I think it's very important, like what you were saying about the 3 bottom line, where it's, you know, we're taking into consideration more than just like what is the true cost of supporting a certain company. And we know that like plastic consumption and production is a huge issue that's poisoning the oceans. I think I saw a video the other day on Instagram of these, I guess they were fishermen, but they pulled a soda can, like an empty soda can out of a fish, a dead fish, out of the stomach. So it's like our trash production is insane, but there is a solution. And I think people are becoming much more aware about zero waste living. I think, you know, maybe people more in the United States are a little bit more behind places like Australia and New Zealand, which have been kind of at the forefront of that movement. But even here in Nashville, like there's a place called the Good Fill, which is a little zero waste living store. And now they're growing to a second store here. And I'm slowly starting to incorporate, you know, zero waste style products. Like I've switched to a deodorant that doesn't have a plastic container.
Mhm.
and the deodorant itself is like natural. So there's not aluminum and all of the stuff that we're like putting into our bodies that also can create problems. I've switched to using a menstrual cup instead of tampons, which we only just recently found out that tampons have like, carcinogens and chemicals in them that can give us toxic shock syndrome or lead to cancer. So, they've done a good job about like removing those from the tampons, but now it's the issue of waste.
Right.
So that's like one thing I really encourage women to do. And it's cheaper, it's more economical. You
Yeah,
buy
totally.
one menstrual cup and you don't have to, worry about your trash production, and you just reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. And you buy it one time and you don't have that expense anymore.
Yeah.
It's like
It really, yeah. One of my roommates, I just moved into a new apartment this year, and that was like one of the first questions she asked me was about like, what do you do about your period? So yeah, I think it really is like almost a huge part of zero waste is like reslating like what we think about, like in some cases sanitation, like for products like that, people are just kind of freaked out by the idea of it. Or I don't know, even like thrift shopping, like some people are skeptical about like, oh, I don't know who wore this before me, and like, I don't know, I think it's just kind of rewiring like what being more mindful of your consumption, like you were saying. And although it might be nice to have a new thing, it's equally as nice to have something that's new to you, that's been worn or used before you, and provided value for somebody else too.
Yeah, and like finding ways to take something that is old and has been worn and wear it in a new way. Like, I think there's value in new. Let's talk about shoes, like tennis shoes, because sometimes like that's the hardest thing for me is, and I actually think Nike has a program where you can bring back. Is that right? Yeah. Like, so I know Nike does it. So they're like, putting in a good footprint, no pun intended. Yeah. So you can take, if our listeners haven't heard, if you have an old pair of tennis shoes, is it any pair of tennis shoes or just Nikes? Do you know?
I believe they actually take any tennis shoes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So any old tennis shoes you have, you can take them to Nike and they'll recycle them. But that's been like the hardest thing, because obviously you don't want to wear like super old tennis shoes when you're going out to run and like need that support. So I don't know if you have any little nuggets to share on that, but
yeah, tennis shoes. Yeah, I do actually talk about Nike a lot in my book, because I think, yeah, ultimately having longer lasting shoes is like the best thing that we can do if we're buying new, or just in general, because it can be difficult to recycle. Like the program that Nike has is called Nike Grind, and so they kind of separate the different components of the shoes, and then sometimes it's turned into like asphalt and not necessarily made into a new pair of sneakers. So there's kind of like a slew of other environmental concerns that might come from that. So it is, recycling them would be a good alternative, but I think that like investing in shoes up front that are going to last you longer is a good way to do it. I also like sometimes steal shoes from like my mom or something. So that's probably the best way, honestly. But yeah.
Yeah. I have a few pair of shoes that I've like invested some money into, and they're still, sometimes you just gotta like go and get like a new sole for your shoes. The repairman and get some new soles. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about environmental justice. What does it mean? How are we a part of the problem? And what can we do to be a part of the solution?
Yeah, so I think that this kind of carries on nicely from what we were just talking about, because while it can be preferable maybe to make these bigger investments in products that will help us go zero waste, it's not always like realistic for everyone who might not have this like large amount of disposable income. And it's kind of unfortunate because I think that the zero waste community online has been a little bit misconstrued into like kind of promoting consumerism in a way, and like romanticizing what it looks like to be zero waste. Like, oh, you have to have all these like super cute mason jars, which like I love, don't get me wrong, but it's not necessarily realistic for everyone. But I think that the heart of zero waste, which is, you know, repair and reuse, these are things that are accessible to anyone. And especially when you're talking about like indigenous cultures, being so close to their environment, they've kind of favored resource conservation all along and like have become masters of that and acquiring skills that allow them to repurpose things or like conserve them essentially. So I think that it is sort of like this mindset shift.
So are they the real conservatives of America?
I think so. So yeah, I think that mindset shift is definitely kind of part of it. There's also like the fact, I worked at a nonprofit over the summer called Plant Chicago, and they are a circular economy nonprofit, but they do a lot of work with like local food systems, like hydroponics and I guess other sustainable growing practices, but they operate in a low-income neighborhood, and they have like a weekly farmers market to kind of like educate people on how they can be more sustainable and grow their own food. So I think the education piece is a big part of it, and just increasing accessibility of like these different, I guess, innovations that are going on, because it's not really, these innovations aren't occurring in a bubble. They're really affecting our society. So yeah.
Is that something that you think you might want to do whenever you graduate, is like become an educator and try to do it on like a more national scale? Because I feel like with these issues, you know, environmental justice especially, and a lot of other things, you know, we kind of as a society expect the government to do something always. And sometimes that's not the best way to go about it because of politics, of all the politics that come into play. And I really feel like a lot of Americans are losing faith in the entire system as a whole. And it's more like, if we can develop relationships with and trust in people who are, you know, doing the work and going and getting education specifically for this, and the power that we have now with the internet, you know, is that maybe a better way to approach education on a large scale?
Yeah, that's something like, to go to your point about maybe the distrust in the government. I think that that's a component that I talk about heavily in my book, and it can be hard, or it can be, I guess, ineffective to just point the finger at somebody else and be like, oh, well, you're the reason why the oceans are flooded with plastic, right? So really taking that ownership is a huge component. But yeah, I definitely do. That's my essential career goal, is to educate people on this topic. And interestingly, I'm also like working on a podcast right now to discuss some of these issues. And we just recorded the first episode today, which is pretty cool. But the idea of it is having intergenerational conversations on the circular economy, and trying to engage people from multiple different disciplines on these issues, because, right, it can be disheartening to be like just speaking to a choir and not really making actual progress. So I think the goal of the podcast is to pull in people from policy or industry or education, to really like increase I think there's power in numbers, right? So just increasing the number of people that know about the circular economy and being practical about strategies that can make it happen.
And I really think to your point, as far as like industry goes, like big companies should have an environmentalist like component, or, you know, someone who's running that side of things, who's job it is to really understand their footprint. And maybe a lot of companies do that, but it seems like a lot of them don't.
Yeah, no, for real. Yeah, I am a senior, as I said earlier, and just like looking around at different job opportunities. And so I've gone to some career fairs asking like large corporations if they had any sustainability like positions, and a lot of them just kind of came back with blank stares, like and it was even more surprising because on their website they highlight all of their sustainability goals. So it's just kind of interesting to see that disconnect.
I feel like it's a similar thing where Pride Month comes around every year and companies wave their rainbow flag for a month and post social media posts with supporting LGBTQ. And then as soon as it's over, it's like, all right, back to regular scheduled programming. But I think that's something that's maybe a niche that you can carve out and be kind of a maverick or like a leader in, is maybe because it hasn't been in place, no one's ever really created that vision before. So someone like you or your peers who you're going to school with could create what does that look like, and then go present that to companies and be like, this is why you need me, and then don't really give them a choice to say no, because this is 2021, like the planet, we need to like take this seriously. What can you define circular economy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's one of the challenges in educating people about it. Is on its face, it's a little bit ambiguous, but I'll just kind of explain and then go into it. So basically, the circular economy is the idea that we should keep our resources in use and try to eliminate waste from a production standpoint, is kind of how it's most often understood. But it's really this idea that it's kind of like the reduce, reuse, recycle trajectory, and in that order. So we should try to keep materials in their highest value use and not just turn to recycling as an alternative. We should try to keep materials, we should not downcycle and try to keep materials in a useful form. So this kind of has two benefits environmentally. So we're extracting less from the natural resource side, and then we're also creating less waste. So it's kind of an interesting balance, but yeah, that's essentially what the circular economy is.
Okay, reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay, and what are some criticisms that you've come up in your studies against the circular economy? Like, what are some roadblocks that you've hit along the way?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. Recently, I had a conversation with a professor in materials science, discussing my book and what the circular economy would look like. And he was essentially saying that for things like plastic, it's just so much cheaper and perhaps less environmentally destructive to use virgin plastic than to recycle it or find some other kind of reusable material. And so that obviously creates a challenge for producers who, first of all, aren't really environmentally conscious, and second of all, mostly concerned about their profit margins. So I think that that's a huge barrier, is that it can sometimes, especially upfront, be more costly. And then also the recycling process for certain materials is not necessarily refined at a point that can be sustainable. And a lot of times materials like plastics will be downgraded. Like I had a conversation with my mom the other day about how she saw like plastic bag recycling at the grocery store, and the probability that those bags would be turned into bags again is probably pretty low because it's such a low grade plastic. But yeah, there's definitely different challenges for like each material that you're considering. But plastics, I think, is one of the number one things that people think about.
I also heard that like less than 5% of what we like try to recycle actually gets recycled, like some crazy number. So if the recycle people are not actually recycling, then we should probably really focus our efforts more on reducing, like Lauren Singer, for example. I know we've talked about her. So she like doesn't even produce any trash. So Lauren Singer, for those of you who don't know, is a zero waste warrior, essentially. She opened a shop in Brooklyn called Package Free, and her handle on Instagram is Trashes for Tossers. And I met her at an environmentalist climate change event in LA years ago. And so actually meeting her was like the reason that I started looking into this in the first place. But she, like, her journey was, she realized how much she was throwing away, and then got to a point where she was able to put like her entire year's worth of trash into like one mason jar. And I'm like, I don't know how that happens. I'm going to Trader Joe's, I'm buying my groceries and everything is packaged in plastic, from, my berries to my salads, even the greens, like even the stuff that doesn't grow in plastic is still being wrapped in plastic and then sold to us. So like, I mean, I guess the alternative is to get some like reusable, like grocery bags, and then bring those when you go shopping, and maybe don't get like packaged as much.
Yeah.
So sad, because I love popcorn.
Yeah, it is really crazy, like seeing like pictures on Instagram or whatever of like individual potatoes wrapped in plastic. Like there's absolutely no need for that. But yeah, I think that also kind of goes to like the food access thing. Like I was especially impressed by Lauren Singer's story, because I've never been to New York, but it seems like the culture of like disposability, and I feel like it would be even harder for her to access like food markets or things like that, like farmers markets where she could get fresh produce, and it's a lot easier to kind of avoid plastic in those settings. But yeah, so for me personally, that's kind of what I do at the grocery store, is bring those like reusable produce bags and things like that. But even doing that, there's still plastic produce stickers on oranges and things like that. So it's really challenging to completely avoid plastic.
Yeah. I worked on a movie over the summer, and if there's any industry that like needs an environmentalist, like they had the COVID people passing out, plastic masks, and that like drove me crazy. I was like, oh my God, there's even more plastic than there was before. Like, and the thing is like, they had the big face shields, like the big plastic face shields for the actors, and they'll use them for 10 minutes or something, and then like by the end of the day, it's like, just throw them out. Like I was in charge of actually like collecting a lot of the trash for the production, and so I was able to see just how much trash we were producing. And on some days when we'd be on location, we would have like 3 little dumpsters, and all 3 of those dumpsters would be filled up by the end of the day.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Pretty terrifying. So there's also definitely like room in the TV and film world for what you and your peers are doing. Like I think it is super, super, super needed to have that department. And I mean, this is like non sequitur, just like a little bit of a sidestep, but it is all connected, right? Like how, like it is really all connected. And the film industry is about to go on strike because people who are in the crews, like below the line, like the camera operators and the grips and gaffers and costumers and makeup, hair, everybody, the hours have been so crazy, and we're now getting to a point where how we've done it for the last several decades is that
Uh-huh.
it's not sustainable for people's health. And I think that's kind of like the point that we're getting to across all industries and everywhere is how can we work together that people who are doing the work are not being exploited, that the earth
Mhm.
is being exploited, and how can we, what practices can we put in place that don't continue to just like produce more and more and more waste.
Mhm.
And so, yeah. So anyway, I think that you guys belong in those places as well. I think it's going to be really important moving forward. So why should someone care about waste and the circular economy as a tool against climate change?
Yeah, so I think that like one of the things that inspired me to look more into zero waste. I've kind of always been an environmentalist, or at least since high school when I identified as an environmentalist. But zero waste specifically really called to me because it allows you to make a tangible impact. And you can really see like, oh, I'm going to the trash chute like far fewer times than I've gone before, or my trash bin isn't piling up as much. And it's really like an empowering way to like keep you motivated and still like make an impact. But I think that zero waste is also really impactful because it doesn't just address climate change through like reducing the amount of manufacturing or the greenhouse gases coming from production, but it also helps preserve natural resources. And it's kind of at the pinnacle of like several different conservation issues. Like, for example, if we are even reducing like paper packaging, that would kind of help us contribute to reducing deforestation in the Amazon, or preserving water quality in marine ecosystems. So I think that like zero waste has a lot of potential to address a lot of different environmental issues, which is why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah. How can we, well, I guess these are two questions, but I know, like there's a huge cry for veganism because of the meat industry's effect on the planet and creating global warming. I've noticed living in the South that there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of people who are like, don't want to be vegan. I myself like to have a little bit of meat in my diet just because of my blood type. And I'm not a crazy meat eater. I don't need to eat it at every meal. I just try to be mindful about where it's coming from, how it's produced, and all of that. So maybe, like, what, in your opinion, is a bigger contributor? Is it, or is it all kind of the same? Like, in your view, what do you think is like the worst thing that we're doing as a species to kind of contribute to
Ooh,
the state of things?
good question. So I will say, as a side note, I am a vegan also. But I think that like what veganism and zero waste have in common is that they're both consumer driven, and it's really like an individual choice that you can make. And I think that a lot of like the climate change discourse like revolves around changing systems, which is definitely needed. Like I think that that's like the ultimate goal, but because without like climate change policy, energy policy, things like that that promote renewable energy or more efficient systems, there won't really be a huge change.
Equity, the
But
workplace,
Mhm,
equal pay,
mhm.
and I mean, this conversation could go on forever. But yeah, okay, keep going.
Yeah. But so like something that I hear a lot of people say is like, I could go zero waste for a year, and like the carbon emissions saved from that are instantly blown by some billionaire that wants to take a rocket ship to space, you know? So in those, it can be really disheartening for sure. But I think,
don't we?
yeah.
Love those billionaires.
But I think that the power that comes from individual like changes in consumption is that it's more of like a culture shift. And that's like we ultimately need in order for like policies to even be effective, is people are passionate about caring for the environment. So like when it comes down to numbers of what helps climate change the most, I'm sure that it would end up being like energy production systems and fossil fuel for electricity and things like that. Also agriculture, though, I think is up there. But I think that like what provides the most value is these consumer driven initiatives where we're kind of creating this culture and working together to like solve these challenges.
Yeah, it is about addressing the culture and like you said, the systems that are in place that need shaking from the roots up, which is hard, especially when you have people in positions of power that, you know, maybe they work their whole lives to get there and they've always done things a certain way, and then having to adjust how you work or do things is really scary for people. Change is very scary and uncomfortable, and I think we resist it a lot because we, you know, what we don't know, we don't understand, and if we don't understand, we feel stupid, and then if we feel stupid, we feel like we have to defend our position even more, which actually doesn't help us progress. So it's really important what you're doing, and writing your book is awesome, and I hope it does really well. What was your experience like writing the book? Like, how long did it take? And did you deal with any like, you know, imposter syndrome or anything like that during the process?
Yeah, totally. So the process, I think it took total 9 months from my initial like research phase through publishing, which is honestly really insane. Yeah. Of course I had, yeah. I did have like a lot of background on these topics, obviously from my studies, but like from the moment that I intentionally started writing, yeah, it was 9 months. And so just like to walk you through the process, I spent like the first 4-ish months just researching and like writing things out. And I was able to work with like a developmental editor who, interestingly, like she was really passionate about environmentalism, but she wasn't necessarily like as in like the niche of the circular economy as I was. So I think that she provided like a really valuable perspective when I was trying to present my ideas. But so yeah, then I had my first draft completed around October, and then I worked for the next like 5-ish months on going back and revising and doing all that fun stuff, and also like doing the fun like cover design, like all that good stuff. But definitely imposter syndrome was something that kind of like hit me like a wall, because I really didn't feel like I was writing a book until probably like 2 or 3 months, like 2 months before I started, before I published. It just sort of felt like a research paper, or like just kind of me learning, honestly. And then it was like at the end where this project was coming together and I was looking at cover design and like, what is the inside going to look like, that I was like, oh, this is going to be a real book. And so then when I published it, and it was released, it was crazy because within like the first couple days, it was awarded as like a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And it was just so surreal because I was like, I'm a 20-year-old like female, like yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's so cool. Well, no, I really want to read it now. I mean, I already wanted to read it, but now I really want to read it. God, that's so exciting, and to do that at such a young age is so impressive. And also to do it in the time that you did it also is a testament to like your passion, because I think things don't take as long when we like really care. And this is an issue that is so timely, and like we need voices around this issue so desperately. So congratulations on accomplishing that. It's huge.
Yeah, it was definitely surreal. And I'm still kind of like not getting over the fact that I have a book, but I have a copy of it with me, which is why I keep looking over there.
Ooh, let's see. Cover. I want to see. Oh, wow.
So yeah, basically the concept behind the cover, or like how it came about, is I wanted to have, I guess behind the title is like the main thing. I really wanted to incorporate like the circular element, obviously because it's about the circular economy, and wanted it to be like nature oriented. So originally the cover was going to have a lot of different like nature themed like circles, like cuts of wood and like cells and things like that. But then it just didn't really make sense with like the business aspect that I wanted to talk about. So then, yeah, that's kind of how we got into this idea of like having a recycling logo, but made up of different things. So yeah.
Okay, that's cool. And I like that it's kind of like fiery. It's you know, it's kind of, because the world kind of feels a little bit like it's on fire right now.
It does. It is burning. Yeah.
It's burning. So, and I feel like during the pandemic, it was actually really great for the planet. You know, dolphins were swimming through the canals of Venice, and I mean, nature was having a great time while everybody was taking a break, you know? And I think it's important for us to realize that we are a part of an ecosystem. It's not just, we're not here to just serve the man. We are nature. Our bodies work as natural beings. And we need to regard each other as human beings, and not these machines that we've been, you know, programmed essentially to be. And so even in my life, I've really tried to like slow everything down. I'm at a huge turning point in my life where I'm having to basically create a more sustainable lifestyle for myself, because, you know, I was in entertainment. I mean, I'm still in entertainment, but I didn't work for a year and a half. And so I'm having to figure out, you know, the next thing, and not just make the one thing. And so I think, you know, sustainability and things that last take more time. And it's important to be more intentional about how we're moving forward. And to the people who are watching and listening, like, you know, understand that our habits take time to change. So be gentle with yourself. If you're considering going vegan and, you know, you eat, like, accidentally eat a piece of bacon at a party, like, you know, chalk it up to a piece of bacon and then get back on the thing. Or just, you know, just be mindful. We can ease out of it. It doesn't have to be a rip the Band-Aid off situation. Little tiny efforts here and there, changing your deodorant, switching from tampons to a menstrual cup, like whatever it looks like for you, go for it. And definitely check out like some resources like packagefree.com or the Good Fill, and just looking up zero waste on Instagram. Are there any other resources that you like to look into or follow?
Yeah, I really love the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They also have a podcast, and they're a little bit more, not necessarily for zero waste lifestyle, but if you're interested in like the circular economy at large. But yeah, I also, oh, go ahead. What did you say?
What's it called again?
Oh, Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
MacArthur?
Yeah.
Foundation. Okay.
But yeah, I did just want to reiterate your point that, like, I think that that's the pitfall of like a lot of different environmental movements, is like it can seem like an all or nothing type deal. But what we need is like rather than having one perfect environmentalist, having thousands of imperfect environmentalists and people who are being critical and trying to make changes where they can, that like fit their lifestyle, but always trying to grow and do better.
Totally. What's the name of your podcast, by the way?
It's called Regeneration. We are probably going to be releasing our first episode in a couple weeks. And yeah, so kind of the idea is we'll be interviewing like experts from the circular economy. And the first season is going to be around circular fashion. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Yes. I just went to Fashion Week in New York and I found myself there and I was like,
in pain.
it's just hard because, you know, fashion is something that I love. It's one of the best ways that we can express ourselves, and it can be very fun, but at the same time, you know, we got to be careful about how we're producing this stuff because it can be very ugly. We won't go too much into that, but so what was your favorite, like once you released the book, like what was, looking back, like what was kind of like the favorite moment or part of the process of writing the book for you?
Ooh, one milestone moment that I can think of that was exciting, maybe not my favorite part, but during the, actually I would say, yes, I would say this. One of my favorite parts was interviewing people during like the early stages. So I got to talk to people from like all over the world that had different companies focused on. So one of them was called the Compost Kitchen. It's like a South African based company. And they have this whole like composting service that provides these little pails, and then they take it to their composting facility and then give compost back to people to use on like their home gardens. So I was able to talk to the founder of that company. I talked to a woman named Cressy Westling, who owns a company called Elvis and Cressy. I think it's actually a designer brand, but they make purses out of fire hoses, used fire hoses in London. It's a really cool company, and I was able to talk to their founder too. So having these conversations and just seeing like the different niches that people are passionate about in zero waste was definitely the best part.
Yeah, I think whenever I was younger, and obviously I didn't study this for, you know, I didn't go to school like you're going. When I was younger, I kind of like blew up, you know, climate change has been like such a huge topic of conversation for millennials and Gen Z. And for me, it felt super overwhelming thinking like the world's going to end in 10 years. Like,
yeah,
everything is melting, everything's going to crap. And unless we all come together and like figure this out right now, and I would just like worry. And I think what I'm learning is that like we do have time, like we can figure this out. Like we are being given the time by the grace of God, and hopefully, you know, the grace of people who are listening to young people who are taking an interest in this and learning about it and being thought leaders around this subject, because we need it. I wanted to ask you, I don't even know where I was really going with that. Oh, that maybe just to say that like, if it feels all consuming and like so much to take in at once, like pick like one thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the one thing, yeah, or a couple things and go with that. I wanted to ask about, you said you went to Indonesia.
Yes.
Study. Where in Indonesia did you go?
I went to Bali. I think this was in 2008. So I know that like the conditions have changed a little bit, but one like vivid memory that I have is we went to this place called like the Monkey Forest Preserve, and they just had like little monkeys. Huh?
Was it in Ubud?
I don't know.
Okay. I went to a monkey forest that was in Ubud, but they probably have one. But anyway.
It could be. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe a similar thing, but yeah, I just remember they had several temples like in the forest, and monkeys just like swinging from trees, and they would jump on your shoulder, and like, I don't know, it just felt like a very different, I mean, obviously very different from my upbringing in Chicago, but I just loved the feeling of, it was so freeing, and I feel like I was really able to just connect with human and non-human species and spirits, and yeah, it was just amazing.
I love that. I love Bali. I did my yoga teacher training there a couple years ago. It's a magical place.
Yeah.
And that was right around the time that I started learning about zero waste, because there's a huge vegan zero waste like movement going on in Bali. I think thanks in large part to like Australian expats and stuff, but
yeah,
so cool.
For sure.
And they need it because a lot of their beaches are like totally trashed with plastic that probably is floating over from the US.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cool thing too, like when you were saying about like the fire hose purses, one of the things that's been interesting and fun about following other people's environmentalist journeys are seeing the cool ways that people are innovating and figuring out how to basically reuse, would that be reuse or recycling? Recycling or like repurpose.
Yeah.
Different things like I know that there's a yoga pant company where they recycle plastic water bottles, I think.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the company, but I thought that was like just genius. I'm like, someone came up with that. That's so incredible.
Yeah. There's also this company called Orange Fiber that I looked into for my book. And they work with like several different designer brands. And they're based out of Italy, where there's a lot of like citrus is really common there. So they take the peels from like the orange juicing process and turn them into like textiles. So I think it's super cool, like seeing those innovations too. Like, who knew you could literally be wearing orange peels?
Yes. You know what else I wanted? So we kind of barely touched on environmental justice. Intersectional?
Yeah.
Okay, what's intersectional environmentalism? Like, how would we define that?
Intersectional environmentalism, it kind of looks at how the environmental issues that we are experiencing kind of coincide with other social issues. So like environmental feminism, I guess, is like one component of that. And yeah, interestingly, I just like read a paper on this, but about how empowering women is such a major solution to climate change, because especially in third world countries, women own large proportions of like smallholder farms. So by educating them on more sustainable practices, that can be a solution to climate change, but also just looking into like women's rights and family planning, things like that. So this is all kind of underneath intersectional environmentalism, because it's not just looking at like technological advancements, but rather like, I guess, again, that systemic thinking.
Right. For someone who might be like a skeptic to, you know, how would you draw the correlations between like the climate getting crazy and social needs? Like, can you get more specific on how those connect?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I were to look
I know it's a deep topic and there's a lot that goes into it. So even if there's just like one piece,
Yeah.
That'd be good.
So one thing that like comes to mind is the idea of, in the United States, we used to ship our waste off to China, or our recycling, for them to process it. And this kind of perpetuated like the developed versus developing country type of dynamic, and how a lot of the people that were responsible for like processing our recycling had terrible health conditions and like a decline in nationalism for their country. But then, so that encouraged American consumers to keep purchasing things because we could just ship off all our waste to another country. But in 2017, they banned the shipment of waste into China.
From the US?
From the US, yeah. I believe it was just the US, it might have been everywhere. And so like this kind of changes the dynamic, and I think that's why a lot of people are starting to think more about circularity and what happens to things after we use them. Of course, this is kind of like also intersected with climate change conversations and different reports that have come out for that. But I personally believe that like that's all kind of related to the fact that we no longer can send our waste to another country.
Well, and America does that in a lot of different ways. We, the problem is always somewhere else, right? We can always like send the problem somewhere else. Wars that we've been involved in for 20 years, we're fighting them somewhere else. They don't affect us. So we don't, as citizens, understand the impact of our decision-making, the impact of us paying taxes that don't always go back into our communities. Like if even a sliver of the percentage that goes into our defense budget went back into educating people on environmental justice and how do you say that? Circularity. Yeah. Thank you. Or just adjusting our own waste and recycling practices within our own nation, not sending, again, the problem somewhere else, so it's out of sight, out of mind. Maybe we wouldn't be having these problems with
yeah
like,
that's why I went to a conference last year as I was like kind of delving into the research for my book a little bit, and island countries for that reason are like such a stellar example of like zero waste and circularity, because they're so homebound, and like everything that they do, especially for like developing island nations, it's hard for them. They can't just really ship it off somewhere because
it's all right there.
Yeah. So they're so like deeply affected by the way that people consume things or produce things on the island.
And you were saying like a lot of the indigenous communities are like, that's why they're so tapped in to what to do, is because that's how they've been living forever. They haven't had the luxury of, sending things off and having that money to bring things in and out. So do you talk about that at all in your book? Like, or is that something you're focusing more on in your podcast? Is will you be able to lean into conversations with indigenous leaders? Because I feel like we need those voices now more than ever. Those voices are being silenced. I read stories constantly about, nature defenders in the Amazon or Nicaragua who are, get killed because they're standing up for environmental justice. And they're always people of color. And anyway, that was a long-winded way of asking you if that's something you plan on continuing to shine a light on.
Yeah, definitely. So it's not necessarily something that I looked into for my book, but something that I've become increasingly more passionate about since publishing. And yeah, I just think it's important. Like, I'm taking a sustainable development class right now, and just the way that we're defining like what is modern or like what is industrialized or developed, it's very very like westernized, and it can be easy to think, or I guess not easy, but just a challenging landscape to navigate, because we don't have the same values necessarily, and we have different objectives. So it's just important to be like considerate of like what their needs and desires are, what Western ideals are, and maybe like how they can come together so that we're mutually, I guess, understanding of each other.
I mean, I think that's that's an important thing for any kind of relation, you know, with other is knowing what works for another, knowing what works for yourself, knowing what another's boundaries are, and then respecting them. We haven't really placed a lot of importance on understanding each other's boundaries and learning how to respect them. And I think that's something that is also going to contribute to the betterment of our society, is becoming more aware of that and being more interested in culture that is not ours. What is American culture but like slavery? Like, there are the cultures that we have brought into America from other cultures, but the culture of America is one of like slavery and exploitation, and we're trying to break that down slowly and create something new. But it's hard whenever that has been kind of like the status quo. If we want to get to a place where we are really truly free, we have to understand that freedom there's responsibility that comes with it, and ultimately, like, you can't be free without responsibility. Like, I don't think that those two things can really coincide. But yeah. So, all right. So we've been on for almost an hour. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on before I ask you some fun questions?
Yeah, I mean, just like as a conclusion, I guess I would say that yes, these are some very deep interconnected problems, and it can definitely be overwhelming. So I really do think the first step is just honestly learning more about how these systems are connected. And I'm still learning, and I've written an entire book on it. There's so many different like things you can get into, but I think the beauty with zero waste is that there are so many different avenues that might be more interesting for you, or you can be more creative in like how you reduce waste. There's just a lot of opportunities there. So I think it's a really exciting topic, and yeah.
I do too. Yeah. And the more people that we reach, hopefully the more people will also find it interesting. What are some of your favorite ways to stay balanced in life, with school? Like, is school kind of your main focus for right now? Do you have extracurricular activities that you like to do?
I do. So yeah, staying balanced has been, I guess, like a big challenge for me, and something I've tried to focus a lot more on in this past like year-ish. Getting into like meditation and things like that. I actually also just read this book called Inner Engineering. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it was so it's by this author this self-taught guru named Sadhguru, and basically he talks about yeah. Oh my gosh, I absolutely loved that book. It definitely changed my life. So yeah, it talked a lot about mindfulness, and especially I read it over the summer. So going into this school year, I've tried to be a lot more intentional about like what I put my energy towards. So for me this year, one project that I'm super passionate about is this project called Phoenix, and it's in this like larger organization for social entrepreneurship. But basically what the project is we take excess clothes from a local clothing swap called Karma Trade, and then we use those extra clothes, and we have a program that teaches high school students how to upcycle and sell them. So it's kind of like creating this like local circular economy for clothing, and like teaching the students about sustainable fashion and upcycling. So that's been so exciting for me because it kind of ties together my passions for zero waste and like sustainable businesses and engaging in the community. So
you should like, visual content, because I would love to learn how to do something like that. I'm sure a lot of people would love to learn. My girlfriends and I were just talking about how we want to do a clothing swap, but like there's going to be stuff that we keep. So knowing how to go about upcycling and like what's the best way to go about like getting rid of the clothes.
Yeah, for sure.
Great.
I think on October 10th, I want to say it's World Circular Textiles Day. And I believe that they have, I received like a newsletter from this group called Circle Economy. And I think that they have different like online workshops for like repairing garments and things like that, because that's something that I'm also very interested in. I am like able to upcycle, but sometimes like the repair piece is like a little bit challenging. So I think I'm going to attend that as well. But yeah, that would be really cool to have like this program kind of expand that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm so excited to see what you're going to do in the future. I can't wait to listen to your podcast and read your book. Again, that's called An Economic Eclipse, Shifting Towards a Sustainable Future by Eliminating Waste by Alexa Smith. And when do you graduate?
In May of 22.
Okay, coming up so soon. That's so exciting. Well, awesome. I'd love to have you back on, sometime in the future. Let's have a little catch up. This was so fun. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, but was like a really good intro episode for, my audience. You're the first person I brought on to talk about this. So thank you so much for being a guest and teaching us.
Yeah, it's my honor. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so excited to hear like what your listeners have to say too. And yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch and hopefully do another episode in the future.
Totally. Do you have any social media or a website that people can find you or your podcast at?
Yes, so my website is alexasmith.com, and I actually recently just got a new Instagram account called @ZeroWasteLex. So yeah, definitely follow me on there. Post a lot of fun stuff.
For sure. We'll do that. All right, thanks, Alexa. Have a good one.
All right, bye.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Balanced Bae Podcast on your favorite listening platform.